Hi everyone, I'm Peter Drake, the Provost of the New York Academy of Art. It's my pleasure to introduce Clifford Owens, the Director of Critical Studies here and organizer of the Keith Timmons Lecture Series. Clifford received his BFA from SAIC and his MFA from Rutgers. He's done postgraduate work at the Whitney Museum of Independent Study Program and Skowhegan. Owens has been a critic at Columbia and Yale and was a visiting faculty at Cooper Union, VCU, and SAIC. Currently, he's a faculty at Sarah Lawrence College and a lecturer at the International Center for Photography. Owens is a transdisciplinary artist. He makes photographs, performance art, drawings, installations, and texts. His art has been in many solo and group exhibitions, nationally and internationally. He's been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Louis Comfort Tiffany Award, and has been an artist in residence at Artspace, McDowell, and the Sharp Atlantis Studio Program, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. Please welcome Clifford Owens.
Thank you so much, Peter. I am thrilled and overjoyed. And I'm so grateful that you all could be here for this inaugural conversation in the Keith Timmons lecture series. Keith came from Baltimore to be with us. He's here in the front row. Raise your hand, Mr. Keith. And I think the Academy, this is an example of the way in which the Academy brings communities together. And we're happy to have him sort of fund and partner with us for a series of talks. This is the first, as I said. And stay tuned for future talks in the spring, which we anticipate will be incredible, okay? I just want to say that I think this conversation is an example of a relationship between an artist and a curator. And this is a protracted conversation, a protracted relationship between an artist and a curator. And this is dynamic, this is special. This is a very important thing to witness, I believe, you know? We often, or I talk so much about art and the presence, the power of empathy in the making, the reception, the understanding. And I hope that we have an empathic conversation. Really, this is a conversation about love. It's a conversation about Philadelphia. Yes. It's a conversation about neighborhoods. It's a conversation about race. It's a conversation about the figure. Okay. Long writes, quote, in David Antonio Cruz's current solo exhibition, When the Children Come Home, at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, the artist explores both traditional familial ties and the multiplicities of kinship in queer communities. Cruz's painterly figures collapse and coalesce with layers of vibrant fashion and dancerly gestures that signal intimacy and love. There's that word again. Works in the exhibition include paintings, drawings, performance, and sculpture created between 2006 and the present. And that will be on view through mid-December, I think December 18th? 17th. December 17th. My friend David Antonio Cruz, we met in 2004.
Yes.
David artist. David Antonio Cruz received his BFA in painting from Pratt Institute and his MFA from Yale University. He also attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture out in London, Skowhegan, and completed the AIM program at the Bronx Museum. His residencies and fellowships include the LMCC Workspace Residency, Gateway Project Spaces in Newark, New Jersey, BRIC Workspace Residency in Brooklyn, a Joan Foundation Award, and a Mass Cultural Council's Artist Fellowship. Cruz's work has been included in notable group exhibitions at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., at the Museo of Barrio here in New York, the Ford Foundation, also in New York, the Brooklyn Museum, the McNay Art Museum in San Antonio, Texas, and the Kemper Museum of Art. Cruz's work was on view at the exhibition, A Place for Me, Figurative Painting Now, at ICA Boston. the Block Museum at Northwestern University, the New England Triennial at Fruitland Museum.
This is
I love it. This is alive.
It is alive.
At the Museum of the African Diaspora. Recent press, and there is much, includes reviews in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, WhiteHot magazine, W magazine, and El Centro Journal. David is a professor of art at Columbia University School of the Arts. Monique Long is a writer and independent curator based in New York City with experience in curatorial and program development across the United States. Her collaborations include institutions such as the Portland Museum of Art in Maine, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, and Guildhall in East Hampton. The exhibition When the Children Come Home is a solo presentation of David Antonio Cruz, currently on view at the ICA in Philadelphia. Long has contributed to arts publications widely, often writing about contemporary art, personal essays, and fashion history. She is currently working on a book about Philadelphia and contemporary art. Give it up, please.
I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight on a very cold late fall night.
Very.
David Antonio, and I want to thank Keith Timmons for
Thank you so much.
having us here, and of course, Cliff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, and the Academy. Thank you so much.
Yes. So I think,
I feel so far away from
I
you.
know we're so far.
It's very strange.
This is the furthest we've been apart since working on this show.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this? How the project is going? Just
It's been really beautiful to work on this project. One was mentioned. Monique and I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm actually
don't skip ahead, honey. Don't skip ahead. But just tell me, if you could reflect on from the point we found out about this project till now, how do you feel?
It was beautiful. I mean, one of the first things, once I found out that the exhibition was happening, when Monique left my home, I immediately called my friends in Philly, and they needed to be a part of this exhibition. I wanted to negotiate and think about my upbringing, my neighborhood, my friendships, my family in Philadelphia. And so I immediately called them to invite them to be a part of it. It was really important that they were seen and were part of the experience. And so it's been really emotional. It's been really beautiful. It's rare once you leave a place to go back, especially since I left so young. I was a teenager. And to go back and reconsider and present oneself and think about the lineage, the history, the art, one's place. So it's been really beautiful. Healing in a sense.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'm still processing it. I wanted to maybe process it in front of this audience today a little bit. I love what you said, Cliff. It really has been about a dialogue that we've been having for such a long time. And this might sound self-indulgent, but I want to talk about how we met because it's relevant to the exhibition in Philadelphia. Can you just, whatever you recall about, we don't really remember exactly when we met, right? But before I became independent, I was working in a number of institutions, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, which is a kind of think tank and a sort of, repository of Black contemporary art where there are all kinds of intersections. So it was probably there.
I'm assuming it was there because before we had the conversation that I remember as our first real conversation, I had seen you around. I'd seen your studio. I was always visiting, being a part of just going to exhibitions. It's being part of. Clifford was there and other folks, but I do recall the first time we found out we were from Philadelphia and from the same neighborhood. We actually grew up about 7-8 blocks away from each other, although we didn't know it. And was at a dinner for an artist friend, And the question came up, where are you from? And I said, Philadelphia. And normally it's never North Philadelphia. No one, it's the one area people don't really talk about in Philadelphia. And so um, it's a shock. We both from the same neighborhood. And the we began talking about what Philadelphia was. Was there an aesthetic? And a lot of questions came up about this upbringing in Philadelphia. Was it something that impacted the work? Did I see my work in that way? Was there a residue or stain of Philadelphia in the work? And so for a couple years, we just started thinking about and just having these long private conversations, lunch, bars, just what is a Philly aesthetic? And so I think that was kind of really the beginning of this exhibition for me.
Yeah, I mean, well before we actually knew there would ever be an exhibition,
Yeah.
we just wanted to unpack it because, as David implied, you really meet someone from our neighborhood outside of our neighborhood. It's a modest neighborhood of working families. I used to make this joke, which, is probably a coping mechanism, that North Philly is like Harlem, but without the cachet.
True that.
And it is historically
Yes.
Black community where my family has lived
Yes.
since 1933. So it was really great to have that as a moment, as a way for us to sort of bond and also sit with David Antonio's work and think about the ways in which, if there was a Philadelphia aesthetic, how would you characterize it?
Oh,
Is there a Philadelphia School of Art, and what does that
I
look like?
mean, there's there's a soulness to Philly. I mean, it's within the food, it's in the music. I feel that's in the art. There's always a sense of like people being present there. I mean, growing up in North Philadelphia, the one thing, I mean, the murals became like the museum of the city, and it was really based on figuration and people. And so it does celebrate art. It has a different tune. It's a very different city. And so, I mean, for me, it's like, is there a Philly aesthetic? I don't know. I bet there's something in it. I do, since you started asking me those questions, I started thinking about the space in my work. Um, and was that affected by the neighborhood and my home in relationship to the house across the street? And so I still think about whether there is a Philly aesthetic. I know there's something there. I mean, it's been beautiful to see the work there. I feel like it belongs there. I think it resonates there. Um, so I'm still processing that.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a Philly aesthetic?
Yes, because I'm writing a book about it. But actually, you actually helped me begin to see a way to enter, because I don't think it's about answering the question resolutely. It's more about thinking, laying everything out and just identifying it and
Yeah.
saying, is this particular to Philadelphia? Because I can say absolutely yes already, but like, what does that mean?
Right.
And you said something to me in one of our conversations that just made my head explode about space and how the depth of field was proportional to the ratio of looking out of your window to the row house across the street. And I couldn't it was coded. It's something that someone encountering your work wouldn't see, but I saw it.
Yeah,
and it was specific to our mutual experience.
Yeah. The layout of the city is very particular. The streets are, they're very single drive streets. They're not very wide streets. And it's fascinating because we grew up on the exact street. And so growing up in the 80s, and anyone growing up in inner city in the 80s understand why I was not allowed outside. And so I the window, window plane exists a lot in my work in the way that I view the world, the way that I think about that really. And when we started having these conversations, certain things started revealing themselves in the work that I consider, but really didn't have the language for it because I couldn't quite understand certain things that were happening and how I view the work. But when you look at it, it's just, it's very particular to that depth of field from one side of the street and what you can see from that point of view.
Wow. And your work was included in the monograph for Alice Neal, a
Yes.
fellow Philadelphian,
Yes.
and also painter of
Yeah.
figures,
Yeah.
which I thought was a brilliant comparison, because she also lived for 30 years in Harlem.
Yeah.
What did you think about that comparison in relationship to our conversations? Obviously, Alice Neal is not Black, so it's a different
Yeah.
point of view, but she is concerned with community and people and this sort of psychic kind of a knowing
Yeah.
of people.
It was beautiful. I was honored to be considering that history and connected to someone who I looked at and respected the work. It's been nice that she's been looked at again, and a lot of focus has been given to her, especially in relationships to the communities. And so it came at the right time. It was really interesting because of the work that I was making to build those connections. And it was the first time anyone has really made those connections and brought up Philadelphia as well. And just thinking, I mean, we went to similar schools. We went to Moore, also the Academy in Philadelphia, where learning the figure. And so it wasn't surprising once you start looking at it. The roots were there, the things that are important in Philadelphia, at least in art, were there. And so it was fascinating to make those connections, especially in this new body of work that ways of framing families and her Harlem images of also the Lower East Side images, and just really thinking about the community, the folks that were invited in. And it was such it's an incredible way to really think of myself, but also that connection, that history, and just line it up and be able to understand how it enters the canon in a very different way.
So I want to skip ahead so we've had like 10 years of just talking theoretically, hypothetically about Philadelphia and aesthetic. And then I have an opportunity to mount an exhibition at ICA. And, I'm always thinking about ideas and thinking about concepts for shows. And I realized it had to be you because we had done all this thinking about it. So half the work was done. We just had to gather the work, make the work.
Yeah.
You creating the work and me sort of like the writing and the organizing of the show. And almost immediately you came up with the title.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what the title "When the Children Come Home" means to you and how you see it as the preface for the exhibition?
I think a lot about poetry, and titles are really important to me. Idea of possibilities, of posing a lot of questions. And so when you proposed the exhibition, it immediately came I said, oh, when the children come home. It was this idea that we have been talking about this for a while, and the fact that we were having the opportunity for us to go back and reconsider that history, our bodies in a space, that history for ourselves and how we thought about Philadelphia. And so you kind of made me stick to it. I wanted to change. I wanted to extend it. I like to write really long titles, as you can see. And you were like, "No, it's that." But when the children come home, for me, became a statement about a possibility of going home, of maybe arriving, or the possibility that someone would arrive. It doesn't really describe who the children are, and it was just a way of thinking. vast way of like arriving at a moment, that a possibility that maybe this will be the moment that everything would be understood, or everything would heal, or that I would come to terms with childhood, or that a city, would come to terms with my art, or arrive and present the thing that had grown from that place. So it opened up for a lot of ways of thinking about it. But in a sense, when I think about the sense of community and family, it was also, you were implied in it,
Hmm.
um, that um, that person that had grown up in Philadelphia was implied in that title. The person that my parents thought I was going to become was implied in that title. There was a lot of things that I wanted to be implied with when the children come home. Um, Lots of questions. And it was really important that everyone that I knew from childhood were included in that work, in that project, because it was the possibility that we would be seen.
Hmm.
Leaving from that place, it's a place where people don't visit, and so it does become a place of in the shadows, where not a lot of voices are heard or seen or talked about, and so it was a moment of possibility for us to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it just struck me as it was perfect as it was, that sort of unopenness, because it almost is like the beginning of the sentence,
Yeah.
and the exhibition
Yeah.
itself tells you the rest. Um, the subjunctive, just getting into the poetry of the title, the subjunctive of
Yeah.
if they come home.
Yeah.
Um,
It was fascinating when they were doing translations into Spanish,
yes.
because it's very gendered in Spanish, and I don't think of that way in my work. And so it became very difficult to do these translations, because it was forcing the possibilities were being removed because of the language. Yeah. So it's
Yeah, all the text was both in
in
Spanish
Spanish and
and
English,
English.
except
Yeah,
for the title.
except for the title.
Yeah.
Um,
What did it mean to you? Because if you don't mind me asking, because
yeah.
you immediately was like, stop,
Hmm.
let me write this down,
Yeah.
and this is the title. And I
This is
said, now I revisited the conversation. I was like, no, I think this is the title.
yeah.
Why? What was it about it that immediately resonated with you?
Because it wasn't there's kind of an inscrutability if you're not inside of it, there's
Yeah.
a kind of inscrutability to a lot of your titles.
Yes.
It's like if you know, you know.
Yes.
So I just loved how straightforward and how opposite this
Yeah.
was, because to come home is a trope, the prodigal son in the Bible, or
Yeah.
the Wizard of Oz, which I'm
I know you.
you know I always talk about the Wizard of Oz, but not everyone leaves home. Let's
Yeah.
be honest. But and
And
especially
not
not in
everyone comes
Philly,
home.
people from
Yeah.
Philadelphia do not leave
It's also,
home. Yeah.
the idea of what is home,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to like queer folks, brown,
Yes.
black folks, the complexities of what home is,
Right.
what a family is. And so I wanted to address that in the title.
Yeah. And it was existential for me, because neither of us had worked on, at this scale
Yeah.
in home. So to return home
Yes.
like this was quite, it was
Yeah.
it was a lot. It was very deeply personal.
Yeah.
And I have to say, for that reason, wasn't my favorite way of working, but we did it. We got through it. I wanted to. So can we talk about some of the works in the show, because
Yes.
it was a lone show, but David Antonio, you made
That's right.
this work, another large oil, and a quadriptych, a drawing of
Yes.
4 panels. Can you talk about how you decide? Well, you mentioned that you wanted to sort of incorporate. This is a double portrait of yourself and
And
your
Arshel.
best friend, Arshel.
Yeah.
From look at that detail, so incredible.
Arshel was the first person I painted.
Yes.
The first person to sit
Ever.
for me ever, outside of like going to school, high school, working at academy. she was the first person I did ask, and when I was 15, 16. And so she was someone that I painted a lot for many years. And it's just such a personal and intimate relationship. And so this is the second, which is about 6 by 10 feet. And for this body of work, I had to completely remove myself from the Chosen Family project. And the Chosen Family, and let me just explain what it is. I started working on the Chosen Family project around the pandemic. It was a way for me um, to bring folks together, because the idea of the pod and the idea of separation didn't really lean or talk about queer families or queer spaces. Those spaces were closed, so the pod didn't really describe a queer family. And so it was for me how to bring folks back together. So it became a series of conversations about Chosen Family. What is Chosen Family? And allowing folks to pick folks to participate in the work with them. And so I had to remove myself from that work. I didn't want to be a part of the work, except when Philadelphia happened. And it was important that I was part of that conversation. And so I did ask my Chosen Family and biological sister to be a part of the work, which was housed pretty much in the smaller project room, which is also about Philadelphia, the landscape of Philadelphia. The wallpaper is constructed from Green Mountain Cemetery, where, strangely enough, we found this out when I started working on this, that we had families that were both buried in the cemetery. But that wallpaper is a path along the cemetery. So I wanted it to be about the landscape of Philadelphia, the northern part of Philadelphia. And so the drawing, the 4-panel drawing, is it's a silhouette of the cemetery, of the path in the cemetery. You don't see the tombs, but what you do is see it's a path that cuts along the cemetery that a lot of Black and Puerto Rican families bury their families there. And so it's housed right in the middle of North Philadelphia. And so the second panel in it actually marks off the map of Philadelphia. And so as you look at it, it's embedded within the work. And so it is about the residue, the space, the landscape of Philadelphia. And so those things are quoted throughout the rooms. The chandeliers, there's 32 chandeliers. They're also about Philadelphia, about Sunday culture, church culture. They're all bedazzled with brooches and gems. And so I wanted those works to be really about Philadelphia, about home, about the history, about the landscape of it marked through art.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it points toward the personal nature
It's
of this
very,
show
yeah.
because those are semiotics. Those
Yes.
are things that are so coded that the average, a person who didn't have you standing in the gallery
Yeah, they
talking
won't see
about,
it.
they won't see it. But
Yeah.
somehow, the feedback we've gotten is that people really feel it.
The room, especially, there's
Yeah.
a glitching in the room where the lights kind of fade out, and so there's almost a pulsing happening in the room. There's a warmth to the room. There's furniture that was designed for the room and upholstered for the room, so people are able to go in and meditate or just reflect, just to sit in the room. The chandeliers are actually hung to create an upside down garden, so there's a path through the room, and it's a way I just wanted folks to be able to go in and without consciously knowing that they were consuming Philadelphia. I wanted it to sit within them. The chandeliers cause shadows across the room. So the moment you walk in, you're implied in the artwork. The artwork, you are the artwork, and how you engage with the room. And so there's a staining or a shadowing that happens in that room. And I always talk about not being a passive participator in the work. The folks in the painting, I feel like it's always been about that relationship between the viewer and the surface of the paintings. And so as you enter part of the exhibition, I wanted you to be implied in the work. I wanted you to feel your presence, like you're affecting the room as you walk through. And so, yeah. But they were very personal in a sense. I mean, there's also objects in the room which you chose to add. It was the first time. I'm curious about why. There's some objects that I use in my sculpture that are in the room that are very, very personal, and I don't ever talk about them that way. But they're about the pieces that I use in my sculpture, sorry, my performance work, which normally only 4 people get to engage with them, the folks that we give them to. So you've opened that up, and I was curious about those choices.
Well, I just, simply, I just thought they were so beautiful. I knew that they weren't meant for display, but we did bring. I wanted people to understand that performance was a part of your practice, and so this was a way to remind them, especially if they couldn't actually see the performance.
Yeah.
So there were just, and also, some. It never hurts to have 3-dimensional work and
Yes.
put people off guard.
It was, it was one of the most personal things in the exhibition. When my mother passed, I turned a lot of her, her, her cups, her crystals, her tea sets into art that became part of my performance work. And they're really delicate. I don't let people know how delicate they are.
Yeah.
And I always have to fix them after the performance. But they were never meant to be shown that way because it's something that I hide. And so it was really beautiful to have that moment and know that, especially in that room, and it was so much about home. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm always interested in what artists are hiding. I'm
I know you
almost
do.
intuitively know like you're keeping something, but I'm
You've
drawn
curated,
to
I know
it.
that you've curated shows where you pull out the thing that people are not known for
Right.
and hung out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk. You mentioned the silhouettes, which we can
Yeah.
see in the oils, in the previous slide, that evolved into fully realized works on paper, drawings, and I wanted to ask you about the evolution of how they became separate works from backgrounds in the oils, and if you could talk about the process of making them as well.
I always find folks are shocked that they're black, but I've always made like really small black paintings. I call them the black series or the chocolate series. And the staining or shot, what I really, hello. Uh, I talk with my hands, as you can see. It's fine. I won't touch it.
Go ahead.
They've always existed in the back room. The background of my paintings. They've always been the thing that exists in the shadows or behind the couch. That space, the thing that happens in the background where folks don't really, either create a world or what happens in the work in that moment. And for me, I think about home a lot. I think about place, growing up in different places, some parts in Puerto Rico and then also in Philadelphia, and going back to the island constantly as a child, this idea of home. And so things are placed in the back of the paintings that eventually I started working on them on the foreground, but no one saw those. I hide things a lot. A lot of my work that I don't want people to see. I do a lot of experiments. And so I did some paintings on panels of that vegetation, of that space, the silhouettes, and it needed to be more like skin. I wanted to operate differently. I feel like paintings are more about the wall, about an architecture, a space, that space, that hard surface. I needed them to be more delicate, like shedding some skin. And so I started working on them on paper. They're very delicate. Everything's exposed. They're all done by hand. There's 4 layers on them. One of them speaks of memories of my childhood, and they're just based on my time there. A lot of my photos of childhood been completely destroyed, and so a lot of the stuff I think about are some of the memories that from childhood. And so those are the first layer. Second layer is really about a geographic space. So sometimes they're like New York, Philadelphia, LA, and then a top layer of wax with the figures that reappear and disappear. And so it's a very delicate, quiet, meditative. It doesn't reveal itself. Right. It's about what you see in it. People see different things in it. But there's a structure to them. It speaks of like families. There's a tree that grows through them, all of them. A ceiba tree that grows in the Caribbean, Mexico, West Africa, which is used a lot in rituals, used for medicine. And so I was really fascinated by some of those things. So that's at the surface of them. And so I'm fascinated by the things that exist in the dark. So much of history, so much of our history, queer history is hidden or not talked about. Acts, love, happen in certain dark, shadowy spaces. And so they're very intimate, they're very quiet, and delicate in a sense. But everything is revealed in them. There's nothing hidden. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Your eye shifts. I was
Yes.
just fascinated when I first encountered them when you started making them. Like the figure, it's very hard to determine the figure from the ground.
Yeah, from far away, all you see is space.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you see. It's a landscape.
It's camouflage.
It is camouflage. I feel that sometimes we seek answers.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. And they have no answers. As you approach, you start seeing the things in it. They reveal themselves slowly, and it's only what you're allowed, what you give, is what you get back from them. Yeah. They're very different. They're very intimate. They're very quiet. They're meditative, and they're just solely about home, like a space. Yeah, these are all about. Sorry, that was the one on the right was New York. The middle one was D.C. Oh, there it goes. New York, L.A., New York, and D.C. And they all red oak, white oak. I'm blanking out Mexican palms, and this one had cherry blossoms, although not really native to D.C., but we always think about cherry blossoms in D.C. So they're all very specific to certain places where families were from.
Mm-hmm. Since we're at the Academy, we'll have to dive into the figure real quick. And I wanted to talk about the Pieta and what I realized when I was looking at the checklist, and that's one of the earliest works in the show. But, I was looking at your entire body of work, whatever images I could get my hands on. And it just seemed like that moment, 2006, when you created that work. Thank you to Museo who lent us the work for the show.
Yeah. It's the first slide if you're
right
to show.
We can but was that the moment for you that something clicked? Because it seemed like that's when the body started to sort of be stacked, and the drama of the gesture and poses started to happen after this work.
Yeah, I was working on, oh my God, this body of work.
It's iconography turned into a personal narrative work. This is your autobiography we're looking at.
It's such a personal painting. I was working on the Hibaro series, and Hibaro really means, it's really much a worker, a farmer, peasant. It's a way of almost, now is almost used as a way of fetishizing masculinity. And growing up gay, queer, it's something that's kind of pushed on, this idea of the role of how to walk through, stand, and I still play with those things in the work, risks, all those things in the risk. I'm constantly playing with how we present ourselves. This is me queering my grandfather. There's an image that I'm so glad I borrowed. And that's why it still exists. It's on my wall of my grandfather. After he retired, he had a farm, and that's all I know of him. But I decided to queer my grandfather, his stance, and so hand on wrist. But it was also very specific to Puerto Rico and culture and the dress, the idea of dressing up. And for me, it was just a way of understanding masculinity or playing with gender and really dressing up and acting, performing, questioning, posting those questions about actually Philadelphia. You know, my upbringing, my relationship to the community, that place that I didn't feel that I belonged or I wasn't seen as part of because of the queerness part. And so, um, dressing mom, I had a long relationship of painting my mother, and I had to beg her because I was not kind with all my sitters. Actually, only my mother is the one person that I don't know, I tortured her in my art. And so for having her be a part of that, there's 3 of those works that exist, but the thinking about religion, I grew up in a really religious household, thinking about the history of um, Catholicism, that piece, the history of it, the weight of it, this iconography to actually switch and like dress up this through very Puerto Rican bomba, like, and then also deem it like sexual, gendering it, um, housing so many questions about how I saw myself, my relationship to my mother, our unity, our skins blending into, our clothes blending into each other, but performing on a sense a gender, a culture that felt so familiar and yet so far away. And so, you know, I look at it and I still pose those questions about why, what was happening at that moment. And I had to, you know, and I still look at it, and it was the first time I sat and the couch became a piece of the work. The velvet couch. I love me velvet. I like textures. I love fabrics. I like patterns. I like the act of sitting, um, behaving poorly, and and to expose myself in a way that I would not ever dare to be in the presence of my elders or parents. And so to perform that, which, you know, caused the biggest ruckus in my home between my mother and me, um, which most folks don't understand that tore us apart. Um, and it left a really hard stain mark on me. But to talk about culture, about relationships, about my special relationship to my mother as a queer person, to speak of that delicacy of being held without removing gender, without removing sexuality, my queerness was so important. And so it's fascinating that the couch, that place of sitting and conversing, is the thing that I'm fascinated with. Of bringing folks and sitting, um, but it being allowed to celebrate all the beauty, you know,
Yeah.
and be in their true self. And that to me is the most beautiful and radical way of being, um, to be present in that way. And I encourage it.
Yeah.
I love it. It becomes, and now it's a point where folks are like, can you put me upside down? And I'm like, ooh, you want to do that? But the idea that to be given permission to celebrate oneself, it's something that I love, and it becomes, it's such a beautiful and intimate and sacred space to work with folks. Um, I fell in love with Figure in Philadelphia, going to the academy in Philly, the Pennsylvania Academy. I have long history working with the body. Um, the way I work with it is very different now. It's more intimate. Um, I choose who I want to work with, and why is important for them, and why I think isn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I repeat certain folks become part of the work. I think that we grow and expand in the way that we see ourselves evolves, and I want to create a way of marking that history and that time through painting.
The way
I
you
mean, all emotional.
compose the figures, like the articulation of limbs, the stacking of the bodies, seems architectural to me.
Yes.
Like you're composing a home
It is.
with the figures, touch, um, a rootedness in the furniture, almost like a shelter or a habitat.
I think that we have built such a culture of separation and creating boundaries. And I like when we blend, like we fall into each other. That sense of pillars, architecture. In a sense, I do. Everything is intertwined in a way that creates a way of supporting each other. Yeah, I like when things like melt in a way that almost seems physically impossible. Yeah, and the furniture doesn't exist. The spaces don't exist. I'm constantly thinking of designing and creating a world for folks to just be and held. And so the couches kind of operate the way you will hold a child. They
Right.
they wrap, um, they cage. It becomes really intimate. They become vessels. They become boats. They become floating devices. But they're all this a moment of being held completely. I do have a tendency of erasing the legs or creating legs that won't hold furniture up. I think of it as really much queering, changing, warping, just the necessity to be held, not to do another thing.
So we talked about chosen families in the work. We talked about the existential, which is a theme. Philadelphia, of course. I want to talk about the installation room, the second gallery in the show, where there's been some images. Do you want to talk about how you conceptualize it and what its significance was in relationship to the rest of the show?
When you work with constructing spaces for people, that you imagine, the couches and all of it, deconstruct them, put them back together, warp them, queer them, melt them, color them. I wanted something that people were able to walk into, be a part of, feel like they were in the middle of the paintings. And so once we walked in, I noticed a smaller room, and it was just the perfect opportunity for it. Chandeliers are something that I speak a lot of decadence. I love jewels. I like sparkly things. The Baroque aspects has never been wasted on me. That part of the history art, Philadelphia. And so I wanted to bring that out to the surface so folks were able to experience it differently. I talk a lot about shadows and marks. And so I wanted a space that allow to break down the paintings. I wanted you to experience the paintings differently. It was like they had to submit to this world that I have cast shadows, I have warped things, but this was forcing, the room was doing what it needed to do for it. And the wallpaper itself is also warped in a sense, and it's all really done by the chandeliers. And so the lighting in the room changes its presence. The glow was important. The photos don't really translate. It's really something you have to experience. It's really warm in the room. It slows down very quickly the moment you walk in, and everything sparkles. And then you realize that you can't look at paintings the way that you're used to seeing paintings because shadows are completely changing. All the colors that I'm known for are completely being altered. The glass, the crystals themselves cause these like rainbows everywhere. So, everything in it is being forced to move a different direction. And so as you walk in, um, you can't you can't take it in all at one time. You have to slow down. And so the sitting area was designed for folks to really enjoy it. And I wanted something that to allow you to walk into the work, feel that power. I couldn't really create furniture that would warp. Not yet.
Not yet.
But I wanted you to live in that world. But I also wanted you to take you to Northern Philly. Something so special about going home is the fact that, are you going to see your family? That's the one question. But having my parents they're both gone, they're deceased. I wanted a moment for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that room really was about them. It was how to bring them there, without it being about the cemetery, but bring them from that path and bring that path that marks three walls. And so something that, would break down, but it was a quote that shadows of that path. The wallpaper, it has three layers. One is the path. The second thing is magnolia trees. There's magnolia seeds and trees throughout a lot of my paintings. And the third layer is Goya. I'm obsessed. So there's owls that stretch out throughout the wallpaper. There's also little Martians, little alien people that walk through the wall, like through the whole environment. And so, again, just they operate like the drawings. Depending what you look at and how you spend time with it, it just starts to reveal itself. But it's pixelated. It goes in and out of focus, and so it plays with the surface. So, in a sense, the way the shadows or the drawings operate, the idea that you can't really focus on the surface, it goes back and forth, and so it is playing the tricks on your eyes. It doesn't allow you to really just focus on the surface. It goes in and out of that space, and then it's complicated completely by the shadows in the room. So it's been really special to work on a project in that way. That room. One is the fact that the way that you curated the work is being seen like no one, like they're hung so differently that in the conversations, the things that you're bringing out with the way that you're pairing the works, which I'm super curious still about some of the pairings. But the room itself is small, it's intimate. It allows for you to just slow down and see work differently.
Yeah. I was a little bit nervous about hanging in that room because I didn't know what effect the wallpaper would have, or the work would get lost. But what wound up happening is the work looks like it's emerging from the wall.
The bodies, all the figures just pop off the walls. It's a different way of thinking about painting, to actually put an element that actually deconstructs the way that you experience painting.
I wanted to talk about performance since the slide was here, because I put a performance on the checklist, so I would ensure that the museum would honor your performance work. So during last month we had I wanted to talk about abstraction and performance in your work, particularly green, How I Want You Green, which you performed on the occasion of the exhibition. Can you talk about the libretto and? Sure.
Well, since this image is up, the costumes, every time I perform, when I work with the company, my crew, I call them the crew, I've been working with them for 11 years. They're very special people. Occasionally I perform by myself. These performances are a little more, Clifford see me perform when I break pianos and all the crazy stuff, but I don't do that with them. But their costumes are actually quoting the paintings, the brooches from the chandeliers, the birds. I think about a lot of birds, the idea of queerness, language, Spanish, pato, pajarito, mariposa. And so her clothing and the pearls and the sausages, what I think about Duende. Performance work is something that I've been working on. It's part of my practice for a long time. Green, it's a special piece that was written about, based on the last 11 poems of Garcia Lorca, a Spanish poet, playwright, singer. I mean, he did it all. Artist who was assassinated in 1936. And the last poems were banned for 50 years. They were queer in nature. They're messy. Oh, they're like high school poems. They're like really like desperate love, like, you know, and they're beautiful because there's this moment where he's revealing himself, and it doesn't exist in his other work, which he's really known for. And so I was fascinated by how history is erased, especially queer history, and so it's fused with the Children's Hour, a piece that was written in 1938, the Trials of Oscar Wilde, which also happened in the 30s, the book, the writing, and my history in Philadelphia. And originally I wrote it not thinking that it will ever be performed in Philly. This piece is 8 years old. It's the most, I perform this piece a lot. It's about 50 minutes. There's music. We sing in Spanish. It's poetic. It's queer. It's messy. I play Duck Duck Goose with the audience. Yeah, it's a very intimate. It's sad, and the piece talks about my relationship to my sexuality, sex, in my 20s, walking through Philadelphia. And so when the show happened, you said you had to perform. I melted because the idea that I would perform this piece about Philadelphia there, and so it's a sensitive piece. It's a tearjerker. It's about taking things and breaking them apart. How we relate to folks. It's about poetry and love. It's messy in the most beautiful way. I think my work is really messy, and I love messy. I like gritty, broken. You know, it's in the paintings. It's in the writing. Yeah.
It was great to have it in Philadelphia, so
It's
I'm glad we
very
were.
difficult to perform it in Philly.
Yeah.
My painting of my mother was to my left, and I was just haunting the whole time, having to perform some of the dirtier parts in Philly.
Yeah.
It's very Prince-like in the dirty part.
Mhm.
And so, so you know, there's some sense where you know there's certain things you just don't think you're ever gonna do or say in front of parents. So, but it was really special to bring it to Philadelphia and have the work exist there.
Before we take questions, I wanted to share this quote with you from Baldwin that'll preface my book. But I thought it was important to do it here, and to thank you for collaborating with me.
Oh, she's brilliant. She's brilliant. Um, I wouldn't release photographs to anyone, including my gallery, no one, because I just wanted people to experience the work unlike they have ever been seen. Um, the two paintings on the top are 2 stories high. They're up very high, where we don't normally think of contemporary art that way. And it was such a bold choice. I mean, the things we've done. I mean, yeah. I mean, we talked quite a bit about it. I don't know if you want to talk about those choices publicly.
Well, you know, they'll see the show.
Okay.
You know,
You
and
should. I
I
mean,
don't-
there were and I'll say this because
Yeah.
there was moments I looked at you. I was like, "Ooh, you're so dirty. How dare you?" And there were moments I say, "How dare you?" Because I felt like she was mixing works from different periods of time. They were exposing the secrets that we hide in our work. Those combinations are exposing things, and so there were moments I had to walk away and go like, "How dare you? That was just wrong. You're wrong." And it was beautiful because I love when someone can understand the work so clearly that you're like, I'm going to remix this, and folks are going to see certain things in the work. And so, thank you.
Yeah. So it's been a whole journey.
It's been a beautiful journey.
Thank you. So Baldwin wrote, even the most incorrigible maverick has to be born somewhere. He may leave the group that produced him. He may be forced to, but nothing will efface his origins, the marks of which he carries with him everywhere. I think it is important to know this and even find it a matter of rejoicing as the strongest people do, regardless of their station. So I
Um,
think we're supposed to take questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a beautiful quote. I love Baldwin, and that is so
Yeah.
kind of marker for our project
Yeah.
that we've worked together.
I just have a comment before we just have questions. Really kind of following up on that gorgeous quote from Baldwin. There's one from Toni Morrison, that home is either a location or a destination, both and neither nor. I'm paraphrasing. But I love how you keep coming back to home, and it makes me think of that Morrison quote, thinking about home as the location or a destination. And that title, Children Come Home, is so powerful, and I feel the chills and all the feelings of what that means. To think about home. When you subbed out home, do we think?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if I didn't have a deep need to go home. The opportunity just presented itself, and then I was like, oh God, this is a lot. This is a lot because you have to confront, memory and loss and family and where you've been because you're not the same person that you were.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's rare when you get opportunity to present yourself and the way that you want to be seen, or and it's, the opening was fascinating because I just like, oh, I finally get to be that person, that queer folk person that left, and now you'll have to see it that way. You won't be given the option. This is who I am, and that's really powerful. In that sense, I felt that's been really beautiful to think about it in that way. Um, yeah. Yes. Oh, December 17th. And I'm going to say this. We're doing programming. The last 2 days, we're doing Family Day. And Family Day means that you have to sign up, though. But you're able to come in with your family, chosen however you identify, doesn't matter, and bring your family and be photographed. And we're recreating the installation room downstairs so that, and you'll be photographed for something for you to be able to keep as part documenting your family. So the 16th and 17th, so Saturday and that Sunday, we're doing that. So that would be the last day. You're welcome. Yes. Oh, um, just to clear that up. So some of the earlier works were on canvas, and then I switched over to wood. I still work on wood. I love the surface. I like the way the paint sits on top, the lusciousness, the thickness of it. It's able to take certain abuse. I like to sand things, and yeah, I love the surface. So, and the warmthness, like that warmth that wood has, I sense that. The drawings are on paper, so I didn't want them on wood. They needed to be almost just like a rag, a stain, a cloth, a skin, something that really just hangs. And so when they're framed, um, they're not quite floating, but it's important that the paper is allowed to just roll and curve on the edges, the tear, the staining of all the process. It was really important that all those the layers were revealed in it, and I do that in painting as well. There's moments that there's a lot of stuff that's not finished, It's like, you got it. There's that moment. There it is. Let it breathe. But in it, it needed to be something. I wanted it to exist differently in the world. Something more delicate, more fragile. Almost like poof, would go. Yeah. There and there. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk? Well, Um, this is what made it really special. This exhibition, just the possibilities. There's disconnect. As totally understand. The idea of not being able to return, or that disconnect, especially in biological families. That's something that exists with a lot of us, a lot of queer folks. And and that's posed a lot of friction. And for me, and just thinking about developing ideas, what a home is, creating what a family structure looks like, and that's been a really important part for my development as an artist, but as a person, to create that world for myself. And for me, it's always been, up to this point, really is home is what you define it to be. Whether it exists within your body or in an architectural space. Queerness and home family structures has always been very complicated. It's still, this is why I do the work that I do. Um, we haven't arrived at a place of safety. We haven't arrived at a place where people are seen or loved or accepted or talked to or just seen. And so for me, it has been important for it to be talked about, documented, and its complexities. Certain parts of Philly, certain parts of Puerto Rico felt a distant memory of what home was. My earlier work really was about negotiating that space. Actually, after leaving Skowhegan, I was making the Hibaro work, and I didn't feel that I belonged. And physically, emotionally. And so I think that the last 14, 16 years have been about home, really creating a space for celebration, to explore oneself, sexuality, sex, family structures, and carving out that space that not necessarily is always provided for us or handed to us or accepted. And so that has been important for me. This has been a special gift to go back to Philly, but on my own terms, completely on my own terms, and then bring a body of work. When we started talking about which works were going to be part of the show, it was really important that the chosen family was, because it was like, this is my home, this is my family, this is what families look like, and redefining that versus it being applied. And so,
Yeah, I definitely resonated with the word you said, precarity. It is a precarious thing, especially if you do feel like you were exiled from your home, which I sort of did. I remember saying to David that if I hadn't left, we wouldn't be here
We would.
now.
Same.
And so, yeah, I was very nervous. It was unsettling to, even though I had totally gotten myself into this project, to actually have an opportunity to do it.
There was a moment that I said, "Are you ready for this?
No.
Are you ready to do this?" Because this
Yeah.
is going to bring up all the things that sometimes we just don't want to discuss
Yeah.
at all. Just beyond being an artist or a curator, just as a human being, some of the things that we just don't want to ever address
Right.
because you feel like you've left them all behind.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I mean, yeah, coming from that question, I think it was a great question before this one. I don't know. I don't know how to even formulate, but can you talk a little bit more about like the dynamics among the bodies in your paintings? There's a lot of like gestures of like, we don't know if the bodies are falling and then others are holding them. Yeah. There's a lot of like, yeah, like the meaning of the hands also, how like the hands are holding, change color sometimes. Like there's a lot of like details full of coding. Mm-hmm. That's what so yeah, like that, a little bit more about that tension between falling, holding, melting.
Yeah. Honestly, the Pieta, I think, is the first place where that happens, where my mother and I are not the same complexion, but I purposely made it that way. I wanted that unison. Even in person, you can't see where one begins and one ends. And that happens a lot in my work. I'm really fascinated by that merging of a history of a body, a consciousness of being. And so I'm constantly thinking of how we connect, how we hold, support, that psychological things that there's really no way to talk about or show. And I mean, the way they're composed, they would fall apart. There's noddings. There's when one body begins, another ends at certain moments, but one transforms into the other one. And so there's never a hierarchy in them. One all exists in the same space. They're one body. And I'm fascinated by that as a grouping. I was a couple of days ago, I spent a lot of time in my studio, and I woke up and I was there earlier, and there were birds that were flying. I was sitting on my couch and I was looking out, and they were all just moving together. They landed on the rooftop on the studio building across, and then they all moved together, and it was just so beautiful how they were operating as one brain, one body. And I think like that. I want to map out a world where we all move, they all breathe, they exhale, the heartbeat as one. And so I'm constantly, before I walk into and start bringing folks in, the gestures, the drawings are very much of lines about how, not bodies, but the energy that I want the work to have and how they connect is really what I'm interested in. And so there'll be sketches, and then I'll compose these collages of these ways that I think people can actually be and exist and tight. And, because I love when folks can fall over, but just fall with ease. There's a sense of play, of joy, being permission to be given that. And they take a while to compose. But one of the main things that in order for it to happen, is to have these conversations with my sitters. Just really long conversations about what I want, what I'm thinking about, why I think is important. And so it is really, it's a trusting thing, I always have things in my head. They don't ever know. I always say, you're going to be beautiful because that's how I see you. I always get the list of all the things, and I'm like, it's okay because you're beautiful. And as it's very emotional, it's
like slow motion falling, but also it's like, it's so interesting that falling, but like holding the pose at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, coming from just studying the body, body beautiful, those angles, the way we sit, the 90-degree angle, the twist, the turn. I'm fascinated. I mean, I love it. It's part of my history. It's in my DNA. It's in my skin. I mean, when you have the thing is that I get to compose them, and we talk about what those poses look like and what it means like historically, and then flip those poses and those narratives upside down, completely posing someone upside down, yet holding a particular pose. And it happens, and then there's the moment that I see it, and I said, this is exactly what I wanted, and half of the time they just think I'm crazy. And I says, you're beautiful. I do. I was like, and exhale, and I was like, this is gorgeous. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And because I do, that's how I see the work, and that's what I'm thinking about, and that's how I compose things. And so it's a very drawn out, intimate, and I don't let anyone else around that time. I don't. It's very important that they feel safe, and take that journey. Yeah. Sure. Oh, and the last thing about the green, the color, coding is really important in the work. There's the pajaritos, the butterflies, and there's translations in queerness and how queer animals are used to speak of gay folks, especially in the Spanish language, but actually throughout Brazilian and Portuguese as well, and certain other languages. But I use that a lot as ways of coding. The hands, the green, the sense of coding brown, black folks, queer folks as aliens, of outsiders. It's a way of amplifying that. But they only happen in the moments of touch. And it's a way of subverting some of these narratives that are happening. And so that's why it is the moment of contact in the work. It's the jewel.
One more.
Yes.
I actually, because you mentioned joy, and I actually see so much joy in this work. Could you maybe give a little more detail about how you can find joy within a queer aesthetic? When you're building these images, how do you locate like joy within a queer aesthetic, or how is that part of the process?
So much, especially the last few years, thinking about just the violence. I think a lot of the work really did start changing around Pulse. It was really important to kind of frame the narrative differently. It was important to talk about certain things, certain of the violence. So many folks were being murdered, so many trans women, they weren't being discussed or talked about at all. During the last few years, there was a sense of, sometimes I feel like, folks of color sometimes we're talked sometimes about our pain, and it becomes one-dimensional. Like we're not a full body. We don't have a full history. We don't have a full life. And during the pandemic, I really started thinking about all the things that had been removed that didn't allow us to come together, to be together. And so much of the things that were happening were so much about violence, and our humanity was being tied just to violence. And so certain things were being erased or hardly ever discussed. And this idea that love, community, friendship, family is really rarely discussed when it comes to certain folks was important for me, because we're more than just certain things. We're more complex than any of those histories, any of those. And so it was important for me because one of the parts of the community is that celebration of being alive, of living through everything that's happened, and still being able to manage to live, love, and living itself and celebrating one's queerness is a sense of resistance, period. And so it was important that that narrative was discussed. That love was discussed. And so, because that is part of my community, those are the folks that I love. Um, there's place for all the conversations, but that was one of the conversations that wasn't addressed or talked to about. Even when we were discussing Philadelphia, it was also really, it was something that just being really careful about how certain narratives are talked about, so that it stays in. It's not that the things don't happen. It is quoted in the work. It's part of the work, but there's a sense of survival, of agency that's important in it, and that was the part that I wanted to lean into. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, thank you, Keith, for this moment and bringing us together. And we will see Monique next semester in our next conversation or lecture series. So thanks for coming and great questions. Okay?
Thank you so much.